Welcome to Ridgewood Talks. Through this podcast, we will be introducing you to some of the leaders and legends in our village. We'll keep you updated about fascinating local events. We'll dig into the town's hot topics and so much more. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Jeannie Johnson, the founder of Ridgewood Talks and Ridgewood Walks. The goal of these initiatives is to create a kinder, more connected, and more vibrant community. I'm thrilled to be hosting this podcast with my good friend and all-around wonderful guy, Jordan Kaufman. We look forward to meeting with you weekly and hearing your thoughts on who and what you'd like to learn about in our beautiful hometown. For now, be kind, do good, and enjoy this episode. Here we go. Hi, listeners. Welcome to Ridgewood Talks. Our little hyper-local podcast is dedicated to discussing issues that impact the Village of Ridgewood. One of the more popular aspects of our show is our interviews with political candidates, and this year's election is especially important. While national elections grab our attention, it's crucial to remember how local elections shape our daily lives. And that's why Ridgewood Talks is sitting down with candidates for our Village Council and Board of Education. Just to let you all know, we extended an invitation to every candidate to share their platform with our listeners, and all but one accepted, except Village Council candidate Hungju Kwak. We contacted her via her Board of Ed email address, her 2 campaign email addresses, and her social media platforms, and received no response. The questions we're asking the candidates came directly from our audience, and the candidates did not receive any of the questions in advance. Without further ado, I want to welcome Paul Vagianos.
Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Jeannie and Jordan. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for doing this. I think it's really important that people have an opportunity to hear from all the candidates directly.
I agree. So, Paul, I'm going to just give a little bit of your bio for the people that aren't familiar with you. I also want to point out that this is not Paul's first time on our show. He has sat down with us in the position of the Chamber of Commerce president, the founder of Feed the Front Lines, and as a village council candidate. So he's not new to our show, but he has a diverse background in both law and business, and he earned his bachelor's degree in political science from Rutgers University and later obtained his law degree from Seton Hall. Professionally, he has worked as the Deputy Attorney General for New Jersey, specializing in the areas such as the Division of Gaming Enforcement and Environmental Prosecutions. In addition to his legal career, Paul is a restaurateur. If you don't know this, he's the owner of It's Greek to Me right in town, and he's operated that for almost 30 years. He is married and has been for a long time. He has 2 married daughters and 2 granddaughters. Paul has been a village councilman since 2022, and he currently serves as the mayor. So here we are. Thanks again for coming, Paul.
It's my pleasure, Jeannie. And again, thank you guys for doing this because, look, one of the things I always say is everybody needs to get off the bench and in the game and do something for our community. And putting aside all this good stuff that you guys do otherwise, this is really important because people need to hear from the candidates, from council people directly. So it's really a service to everybody.
Well, having said that, the top question, believe it or not, is Ridgewood has so many committees, boards, and commissions. Tell us about all the different places that you volunteered in Ridgewood.
Oh boy, I've been volunteering in town for a very, very long time. When my kids were young, I spent 10 or 15 years coaching. But it was a great time, and it was nice because you got a chance to chip in and help. And I was always just a small part of larger organizations at that time. As time went on, I got more involved in other issues. And so when I got involved with the Chamber of Commerce, that exposed me to lots of different things. And I think the first thing that I did of any significance was I raised the money. And because of that, we have a Christmas tree where we all want it. And I've done a bunch of smaller things on the from the Chamber of Commerce perspective, but really the 2 big things, Jeannie, are things that you're incredibly familiar with because you did them with me. You called me the founder of Feed the Front Lines. Well, you know that we were the founders. You, me, and a handful of people who decided that we were going to try and help our central business district and feed the food insecure community in northern Bergen County. For me, that was my absolute finest moment, and I think always will be, because it was just such a great thing, and I'm so proud of all of us that we did that. My other contribution that I felt was very significant was that, again, I worked with you and several others, and we brought the pedestrian plaza to town during COVID. So when people had no place to go, we opened up the streets on weekends, and they were packed. And it was wonderful for our residents. It was wonderful for the residents of our neighboring communities, but it was essential to our central business district. And I've been told by many, many restaurant owners that those two things, feed the front lines and the pedestrian plaza, really saved their businesses. So again, I'm very happy with those contributions.
So Paul, you just talked a lot about a lot of the accomplishments, and obviously you've been on the council for 3 years now. So the question I'm sure everyone wants to know is, what motivates you to run for re-election?
I love doing this, and I'm in a good place in my life. I'm in my late 60s, and things have gone okay for my family. And so, we're in a good place, and being able to give back to this community that has given me so much and has been so good to my family. I mean, my two daughters, who are in their mid-30s and married and happy and kids, they are thriving. And I give 50% of the credit to that, to this community. We landed in such a great town, and when I meet newcomers to this town, I tell them, you picked the best place to live. And that doesn't mean we don't have our issues. We have lots of issues, which is why I've always got lots to do. But I got to tell you, it's a great community. And in the same way that I was able to serve when the community needed some help during COVID, I am grateful and honored to be able to serve now.
So Paul, for those who want to learn a little bit more about your campaign and your platform that you're running on, what's the best resource for them to go to learn more?
There's a Facebook page. It has little information. There's a website, Vagianos for Council, that also has a little more information. We are sending a lot of messaging out online. We're sending a lot of messaging out in the mail, the old-fashioned way. And, what I always say is, you got a question? My cell number has been on my council business card since the day I took office. And when I did that, the village clerk, who I really think very highly of, said, you shouldn't do that. It's not a good idea. But Pam, Perrin, and I have our cell numbers right on our business cards. And I'm going to say it right now. It's 201-755-6465. Call me, text me, ask me. It's my favorite way of communicating, and I am happy to answer any questions. And I give that card out freely. So that's really the best way.
That's great, Paul. Thanks. That certainly is a statement. Here's a question for you that I think is something that we're all thinking about as we look at the political atmosphere in an election year. And that is, how do you define respectful campaigning, and what steps are you taking to hold yourself accountable for maintaining integrity throughout the campaign?
If anybody has ever watched any of the hundreds of hours of council meetings since I took office, all I talk about is respect. When I came in, the tenor and tone of the conversation was not what it is today. And of all the things that we've achieved, this is what I am most proud of, which is that in council chambers, people are no longer yelling. They're no longer disrespectful. Occasionally their tone gets a little edgy, but they understand that we will address everyone's concerns and criticisms, but you got to be respectful. I have insisted that when you come to the microphone, when you speak to us, please bring your criticism, because we need to hear what we're doing wrong, because we don't do everything right. Please bring your passion, because we need to know how strongly you feel about it. But please bring your respect. And regardless of whether you give it to us, we will always give it to you. And there will never be anything coming from me or the people who I support that is anything but respectful. Facts are facts. Records, anyone's record is fair game. But even in addressing it, if we're not respectful, we've got nothing. We're neighbors at the end of the day. And look, every decision that this council makes usually upsets some people on one side or the other side of that issue. We're never going to make everybody happy. It's impossible. But when you're respectful, you get to move on to the next issue and find common ground on that issue. And to that end, when people are respectful, it's amazing how much you can accomplish. There are 4 council people who I have said, and now there's a 5th, by the way, all 5 of us. We are 5 different people, but we're all rowing in the same direction. And it wasn't always 5, it was 4. But now the 5th one is on board, and I'm very happy about that. And we're completely different. We don't agree on everything by any means, but because we can work together respectfully, we don't spend time yelling at each other, screaming at each other, saying mean things to one another. And my favorite example of how much you can achieve, and there are dozens of examples, is that in an average year, the Village of Ridgewood paves 5 to 6 miles of road a year. That's the way it is year after year, decade after decade. In our first year in this administration, we paved 32 miles of road. And some of that is from PSE&G, some of that is from the county, but because we have good relationships with PSE&G and the county, and we focus on this, we can achieve things that have not been achieved before. And like I said, there's lots of things like that. The town garage property that has been sitting fallow for almost 2 decades. We just acquired it. It's going to be knocked down before the end of the year. Again, these are not hard things. You just need to be able to work together.
No, and I think, recently I heard you speak at the Rotary Club, and you mentioned about, we run into each other in the grocery store, the pharmacy, local restaurants. And so maintaining that respectful and cordial nature with your neighbors is very key. So, obviously you expanded on the working relationships as well. Another question from our listeners, and this one is probably going to be a little bit of a tough one to answer, but what is the most pressing issue facing the Village of Ridgewood?
There's competition for that dubious honor, but I'm going to say that the Warner Theater is something that is important to everyone in town. We lost our beloved Warner Theater that had been there for almost 100 years. It was a linchpin in the central business district. And, with COVID and with the changing technology and changing times, movie theaters across the country, especially local ones, are disappearing. The company that owns the Warner Theater, Bowtie Cinemas, they've been a family business for generations. Only 10 years ago, they owned 70 movie theaters across the country. 68 of them have closed. So we have to change with the times. Turning this into a long desired performing arts center is probably the number one issue for me. And this is going to be hard. It's not easy. It's going to require a significant investment. And I've been speaking to lots of people and players who are interested in working on this. And I am hopeful that in the next 5 years, we will be able to do that. But there's a lot of real estate between here and there. So it's going to take some doing. But I work on this almost every day. And so stay tuned. I'll keep everybody in the loop.
That's great, Paul. If you don't mind, could you clarify for those unfamiliar with how the Faulkner Act shapes the structure of our governing body and just describe a little bit on that?
Sure. The way this works is, think of a $60 million corporation, because that's what we are. We have a budget of about $60 million, and the Village Council is the board of directors. We chart out directions, where we want the village to be, the goals we want to achieve, and we make decisions about spending money. The CEO of this $60 million corporation is the village manager. The village manager is the person who executes on all of the things that the village, that the council wants done. And under the Faulkner Act, no council member at any time can instruct anyone what to do. Anyone, including the village manager. Only the council as a whole, a majority of the council, can instruct the village manager what to do. The only 3 people we're allowed to even discuss things with are the manager, the village clerk, and the village attorney. And look, it's the only system I've ever worked in, but I got to tell you, I really like it because, look, a lot of people get elected to council. They're all well-intentioned. When a council member is calling a department head or some streets supervisor and saying, hey, I need you to pick up the leaves, I need you to do this, they're getting conflicting instruction. And there's a hierarchy. There are supervisors, department heads, and village manager. And I really like this because, well, each council member is empowered. They are not going rogue telling people what to do, because it would be a violation of the Faulkner Act.
That leads in really well to the next question, which is, who are some of the local leaders that you respect and why?
There are so many people who are off the bench and in the game, and they keep this town humming. And I'm loath to even begin the list because I know I'm going to leave many people off, but I'll take a swing at it. I'll go back to a former mayor who is the head of the YMCA, Ramon Hache, he grew up here. He's what I call a townie, came back to live here, raised his family, and he's been involved for a very long time. And then he decides on his career that he's going to run the local YMCA. These are the people who I admire. Your colleague, Jeannie Johnson, has left her imprint on so many wonderful projects. The ones I talked about, the pedestrian tunnel that she decided, yeah, this is a disaster. We need to fix it, and she shined a light on it, and we all said, yeah, that is a mess. We need to do something about that. And she does that with so many things. Bill Gilsennet, who is a third generation realtor in town, is somebody who is involved in so many issues quietly, behind the scenes, who is always taking care of things. All the people who are heads of their local organizations. One of the things is, like, all the sports communities. These are people who meet at 7:00 in the morning because they're working their jobs to figure out how they're going to organize all the thousands and thousands of student athletes, to get them fields, to get them coaches, to get them playing time, to get them uniforms. It's endless. The people in the HSAs, in the home and school associations, they are tireless in their efforts to just make the schools better. Tony Damiano, who brings more events to town through the Ridgewood Guild than you can shake a stick at. And we go to these events and we don't even realize that Tony has killed himself to get these things done, from the music festival to the Winterfest to the film festival. The list goes on and on. Joan Groom, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, does the same thing. Here, the Christmas tree lighting that everyone believes that the Village of Ridgewood puts on. Nope, we don't put that on. Joan Groom and the Chamber of Commerce put that on every year for decades. If the Chamber of Commerce were not there, there would be no Christmas tree lighting. This list goes on forever, and please forgive me.
I'll interrupt you, Paul, so you can always blame me if someone's going to say, why didn't you say my name?
Thank you so much, because I'm sitting there going, I know I'm going to think of people later. You're like, wait a minute. If you gave me 10 minutes ahead of time, I would have made a comprehensive list with names and positions. But I mean, that's my favorite thing. Many hands make light work. And when everybody gets involved, that's why it's a great town. Not because of the central business district. Well, that's part of it. Not because of the schools. Well, that's part of it. Not because of our proximity to Manhattan. That's part of it. But because the people have all these events. I mean, I go to events. Sometimes I go to 3 things in a day. And by the way, not because I'm mayor, because there's so much fun stuff going on. So it's such a great community.
You're here. Agree with you wholeheartedly.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your kind words. I really appreciate it. And I just want to encourage everyone who's listening, get involved. There are 100 different ways to Sunday that you can get involved in this community. There are so many commissions, boards, committees. And if you don't want to be on any of that, spearhead something. Just do it. Go to the village council, make a proposal, see if they'll like it, and then roll your sleeves up and get to work. That's how things are done around here. You won't regret it. I promise you. It gives you insight into how our community operates, and you're going to meet some of the finest people you'll ever meet in your life if you want to get involved. So volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. That's all I got to say. Let's move on to some nuts and bolts here and talk about some of the things that are going on in town. Of course, one of the hottest topics is always parking. And so one of our listeners wants to know, does the council feel the investments in parking police have benefited the village? And have revenues increased so much to make those efforts worthwhile?
Parking has been a conundrum since the day I walked in the door 30 years ago. And while the construction of the parking deck made a significant difference, as in almost every place where there's some degree of commerce, parking is always going to be an issue. Always. It's too expensive. There's not a parking space near to where you want to be as often as you'd like it. And we are always trying to make it better. Does anybody like parking tickets? No, but you're going to have to get in line at the violation window behind me to pay your parking tickets, because I have gotten more than a couple. You have to remember that the initial reason why there are parking meters is to get people to move their cars. Because if you don't get people to move their cars, then what happens is employees and commuters who get there before any shoppers and diners will get there in the morning and leave their cars there all day long, and no one will be able to park, which, by the way, we used to have 12-hour parking in our parking lots, and every space in every lot was for a short period of time booked all day. And I have to say, and that was something I was involved in back then, we had that changed. We had that changed so that there was a time limit and there are commuter passes, but there's a limited number of commuter passes now. What happened was this became the parking and train hub for the entire region, because people could come and park for $3 all day. So people are coming from Franklin Lakes and Waldwick and Midland Park, everywhere to park. We give out a very, very limited number of commuter parking passes. Now, I want to say the number is like 25, and it's only for emergent circumstances. But what's happened since long before I was here is that the village has come to rely on the revenue generated by parking. Is this a perfect system? It is very imperfect. And there's been some discussion about creating a resident parking pass. There would be a fee associated with it. It would not be insignificant, but this way people could park. They'd still have to find spaces, of which there just aren't enough. Although I have to say, if you go to the parking deck, which is located on Hudson Street, and you may not want to go there, that's fine. It's your choice. But every single day, except for Friday and Saturday from about 6 to 9, there's always a space there. So there is parking. It just might not be in front of the store or restaurant you want to go to.
So let's move on to some other meat and potato issues. This question came from a listener, and I just want to say, if anyone is interested in a more in-depth response to this, I highly recommend that they listen to the episode of Meet Our Leaders. So Paul, I'm going to go right into that. And what steps are being taken to remediate the flooding issues at our fields, et cetera?
I'm really glad you asked that. And when you asked me the question about the most significant issue facing our town, this was one of the ones that I was wrestling with, if it was first or not. So if it's not number one, it's 1A. And if your house is along the Hohokus Brook or Saddle River, it's not 1A, it's number one. Because what's happened is, as everyone knows, with climate change, the 1,000-year floods happen 3 times a year now. And in fact, this past winter, we experienced flooding 3 times in a 4-month period. It was unprecedented. And unfortunately, I think we're all concerned that this is only going to get worse as time goes on. And while there are short-term things that we can do to address some of this, the big picture solutions are longer term. And let me explain. So in the short term, we can make it a little better by doing something called desnagging and desilting. Desnagging means all of the fallen trees and debris that have fallen in those 2 waterways, we can pull them out, because what happens is they will create a dam and exacerbate flooding. So we can do that. We can also desilt, which means as those waterways fill up with additional silt, we can take out the additional silt that's there. The issue is that the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection does not allow us to take any further action to address flooding. We are absolutely not allowed to do it, because every action that we would take to make flooding better in Ridgewood will only make it worse downstream in Glen Rock and those communities. So the DEP wants the water to overflow its banks naturally, because anything else will only make it worse in downstream communities. Now, that being said, there is a way we can address this, and we have begun. A few months ago, after that series of floods, with the help of our Congressman Josh Gottheimer, we reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And they take on projects like this, where they look at a flooding situation and they come up with a way to address it without exacerbating it downstream. And they have begun. Now, here's the thing. This is not a quick and easy solution. This is going to take a decade or more. Now, that's for those whose houses are being flooded, I'm sure that, that is just so frustrating, but I'm giving you the straight skinny on this. We need to get federal funding. They need to do studies. They need to figure out how to do this. And it's going to take time, but we're started. Whereas up until this administration, no one had started. And so if this had been started 10 years ago, then maybe we would be where we need to be now.
All right. So what I'd like to do, Paul, is I'm going to give an overview of some of the questions that our audience has asked, and I'll just rapid fire them. Okay. So first of all, the athletic fields. There aren't sunshades over the dugouts or baseball fields. Is there any conversation about that?
Yes. At Habernickel, we have begun construction of what we call a pavilion, which will provide shade and shelter. But we have not begun anything at any other fields yet.
Okay. Can you tell us what's happening on North Maple along the Hohokus border?
Yes, the empty lot. That was a Ford dealership for many years. It is owned by Valley Hospital, and they had been looking to develop it until they built their hospital in Paramus, and now they are trying to sell it. It is zoned as a multi-family property with a limit of 18 units per acre. So I'm not exactly sure how many acres that is, but it's going to be a small, low-level apartment building that right now, I believe, not sure, but I believe may have some environmental issues. And so they are working all of that out.
Thank you. This question is not going to make you happy. And I promise you, it was not generated in my mind. Okay. So what is one issue you look back on and say, I was totally wrong? I advocated for a position. I can't even say this out loud without laughing. Hold on. What is one issue you look back on and say, I was totally wrong? I advocated for a position thinking the result would be X and others thought it would be Y. And in the end, they were right and I was wrong. I swear to you, that is a genuine question.
And Jeannie, you actually know the answer to this. After the success of the pedestrian plaza during COVID for 2 years, where thousands and thousands of people came to the pedestrian plaza, and it was a street fair every weekend, and everybody was happy, and people loved it and talked about it all winter. It was a wonderful thing, and I thought, this is the future of Ridgewood, and we are going to institute this in our village permanently going forward. And I was never so certain in my life of anything, because we had a track record of success on this, that this was going to be a slam dunk giant win. And I spearheaded bringing this back. You were involved with me, but this was my baby. No one was going to tell me this wasn't going to work, because I knew and I saw. And when we opened it up, crickets, nothing but crickets. And there were people traveling in record numbers. And we had some bad weather, and there was a toxic cloud from Canada, and there were lots of excuses, but they had nothing to do with why it failed. And the conclusion that I came up with as to why it failed was because we never took into account that the success of the prior pedestrian plazas was really predicated upon the fact that there were no other choices but that. The stores were closed, the restaurants were closed, you could only dine outside. Nobody was traveling. Everybody was here. They had no place to go. And this was the only game in town. And so, was I wrong? I have never been wronger about anything. And like everything, we learn from our mistakes. Will we bring it back one day? I think we will, but it's certainly not going to be a summer-long event. A weekend here or there, maybe. But that's the one that I was 100% wrong on.
All right. Thank you for that. And for the record, I just want everyone listening to know that you and I sparred heavily over that issue.
Yeah, you could say that. Look, you and I have worked on, and we've had this discussion just recently. You and I have worked on so many great projects. The original pedestrian plaza, as I mentioned, Feed the Front Lines, and we have done so many great things together. You get a couple of alphas in the room, and you're going to see some sparks fly. And this one, sparks flew. Listen, one of the things about you and I, we don't always agree on stuff, but we're always rowing in the same direction, which is trying to make it a little better for our community.
This question, I'm going to just go ahead and answer. This person wants to know if there's any talk of renovating the post office. No, the post office is a private building, and the village doesn't have anything to do with that. So we'll move on to the next thing. How about the band shell? Are there any talks about the band shell and spiffing that up?
There is no discussion at this time about renovating it or spiffing it up recently. And I take no credit for it. It was here before I got here. Bathrooms were put in and they have been well utilized and well maintained. I have not heard anything from the Cash Shell Committee about doing any work on them, on the shell. So if we hear from them, we're happy to take a look and see what needs to be done, because it is a local gem that must be maintained. Listen, the council doesn't know everything. I mean, everybody knows that, but now you heard me say it out loud. We hear from our residents about good ideas, what needs to be done, how to do it. And Jeannie, you recently made a presentation to the Village Council that everybody loved about redoing the pedestrian tunnel and enhancing local public art that we thought was terrific. It's not going to be inexpensive and it's not going to be done tomorrow, but we are always in favor of that. I mean, this is a very artsy, incredibly talented town, and when somebody comes in with a great idea, yeah, we're on board. A lot of it needs to be done with private funding, but that doesn't mean that the village can't be involved in one way or another. So everyone on the council is completely in favor of that, because it just enhances the whole living experience here in Ridgewood.
And with that, I just want to say to anyone who's listening, yes, we need all hands on deck. So if you're interested in getting involved in any way with the artistic piece of it, or if you're interested in getting involved with any of the fundraising, we need you. So please reach out here to ridgewoodtalks@gmail.com or go to the Ridgewood Mural Project at gmail.com, and we will get back to you, and we would be delighted to have you on board. So Paul, I'm just going to close up real quickly. I just want you to touch on Shedler, what's happening there. And then I also want you to tell us real quickly what you think should go at the town garage site.
I'm going to do the town garage first because it's very straightforward. That is a building, as I mentioned before, that has been hanging around ready to be condemned for decades that nobody did anything about. And, this administration, we saw it, we took it by eminent domain, we own it, we're knocking it down. But we're not knocking it down until the prior owner, at their expense, cleans up the contamination. And that's going to be a process, so that it's going to take a while, but the initial work that the money is in escrow has got to be done before we knock it down. I anticipate that the building will be knocked down before the end of the year. And once we do that, then we're going to begin the discussion of what should go there. Shedler, which has been the hot button topic of this administration right from the start. This is something that's been hanging around since 2009. Then Mayor David Fund and his administration purchased the property. These are the facts. At the request of the residents of that area purchased it because this property straddles Route 17 and Saddle River Road, which is in their neighborhood. And they were very concerned that this was going to become a strip mall, a convenience store, or a gas station. And so they bought it. The town bought it. And at the time, and it is in the minutes of the meetings, Mayor David Fund said, we are putting full-size fields there because our town desperately needs fields. And quote, I don't want anybody to disappear down the manhole cover when we ultimately do that. Well, it's been a long time. The way to stop something is to slow walk it and to delay. Well, it's been 15 years, and especially given the flooding of our fields, this is a property that is on high ground, and we need to build a full-size field there. We're not going to build the field as was originally intentioned. We're not putting lights there. We're not putting a full-size baseball diamond. It's just not big enough. But we are going to put a full-size field there, and it needs to be done soon. Now, we have since found contamination on the property that was there before anybody on the current council, ever took office. And so we have to clean the contamination, which was brought in there by soil that was contaminated. So we're going to get rid of all that soil. We're going to get a DEP certificate of compliance that it is clean and ready to build a park on. And that's what we're going to do.
Oh, Paul, thank you so much for being here today. And listeners, we got to as many of your questions as we could. We hope that this was an informative interview for you to help you make your decision on November the 5th. And Paul, once again, why don't you tell our listeners how they can find out more about you?
Yeah, you can certainly go to my website, and you will be receiving lots of mail that talks about all of the things that we've done, all of our plans for the future, and who we are. But I say it again and again, easiest way, call or text me, 201-755-6465. That doesn't put you into Village Hall. That puts you into my cell phone. So give me a call.
That's so great. And I'm going to close our interview with this comment from one of our listeners. I want to give a huge thank you to the council for their very productive leadership lately. I think they're doing a great job. It's good to have more cooperation in town again, and real things seem to be getting done. Much appreciated. And I echo the sentiments. So thank you.
That means a lot to me, really does. So, and Jeannie and Jordan, thank you both so much for this. As I said, one of the focuses for us has been communication. It's been getting the word out on the things that are being done. We're working very hard at Village Hall on that. Our new village manager, our director of communications, we are just sending so much info out there, but you need a lot of different media to get it done. And this podcast is so incredibly important. So thank you. Thank you for being some of the hands that make light work for all of us.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.